Welcome, everyone, and happy March Women's History Month. I'm Madeline Di Nonno, President and CEO of the Institute. I'd like to introduce our ASL interpreters, Sharon Pierce and Rachel Groner. Please set your Zoom view to gallery if you would like to see them throughout the event. Closed captioning is also available. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet, although virtual today, are the traditional lands belonging to Indigenous peoples. Today, we give respect and gratitude for the Indigenous people who remain caretakers of our land. I also want to thank Moms First and the Archwell Foundation for their support and sisterhood. So Viola Davis said about motherhood, you have those moments, exhaustion, the stress of having an exuberant child, and you don't want to be judged by your worst mistakes. It's a part of life, and it's what makes us who we are, which goes to the heart of our topic today. Does entertainment media get it right? So here to kick us off is two-time Oscar winner, our chief mom and founder, Geena Davis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are thrilled to be gathered, albeit virtually, to present for the first time the findings of our Rewriting Motherhood report. This report would not have been possible without the vision and leadership of Reshma Saujani and the entire team at Moms First, so thank you. I also want to thank the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, and the Archwell Foundation for also seeing the importance of a report like this and lending your support and voice. This first of its kind report examines the influence of popular media on social norms and expectations and investigates the cultural meaning of motherhood as told in scripted television. As a mom of three, I want to see motherhood reflected with authentic, diverse, and validating portrayals on screen. We know that how we portray motherhood can impact how society perceives the role of a mom, which has been idealized and is not reflective of the realities of juggling childcare and work and mental health. But how we portray moms on TV can also provide more public understanding and demand for social services and workplace policies to address antiquated views and systems. Many of you joining us here today are influential members of the entertainment and media industry, and we ask that you consider developing counter-narratives to long-standing stereotypes and tropes about motherhood, which you can do with a keystroke. We hope this report will be a tool that can assist you in that change. In addition to the research being presented here today, you will hear from a group of experts working in the industry who can speak to their successes and experiences as they advocate for more accurate and authentic representation. Now, before we see the findings, it's my honor to introduce our friend and partner, the founder and CEO of Moms First, Reshma Saujani. Reshma, over to you.
It's so great to be here, especially going after Geena's words, who's such an icon. Hi, everybody. I'm Rashma Sani. I'm the founder and CEO of Moms First. Before I started Moms First, I had spent 12 years of my life building an organization called Girls Who Code, where we taught over 500 million girls around the world to code. But in 2020, everything changed. I started 2020 on top of the world. Girls Who Code had just had a Super Bowl ad. We raised over $100 million for our work. I had just had my second child after 10 years of fertility challenges. But then the pandemic hit, and you saw millions of women get pushed out of the workforce because daycare centers were shut down and schools were shut down. And so many of my students who were on their way to major in computer science, instead of going to college, had to stay home and take care of their siblings because their mothers were essential workers. And schools and childcare centers were shut down. It was at that moment that I realized I could teach millions of girls to code. But if I didn't help their mothers, we hadn't fixed anything. And that's because we live in a nation that has a broken structure of care. The United States is the wealthiest country in the world, but we are the only industrialized nation without paid leave. 1 in 4 women go back to work 2 weeks after having a baby. We're the wealthiest nation that spends the least amount of money in childcare. 40% of parents are in debt because of the cost of childcare. The reality is that women cannot thrive without a thriving care economy, which that means affordable childcare and paid leave. And that's why Moms First exists, because the fixes for moms, they're clear. We need paid leave, more affordable childcare, and equal pay. And at Moms First, we're working on that every single day. So for those of you that are new to Moms First and you're passionate as I am about these issues, and you want to join this revolution, go to momsfirst.us and join our community of millions of moms and supporters. But here's the thing, we cannot win these battles unless we shift the cultural expectation of motherhood. What is not respected is not valued. Decades before I had founded Moms First and Girls Who Code, I was raised by the Brady Bunch. My parents had come here as refugees. I was a latchkey kid. So I spent most of my afternoons babysat by Carol Brady. Her life seemed easy. She kept her house effortlessly clean and she never worried about finding a sitter. Looking back now as a mom of a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, I see just how unrealistic that is. A home that was always clean, easy, affordable childcare, that's not how my life looks. And I know I'm not alone. The motherhood that we see on television, it's not real. It's not the motherhood we know. The vast majority of America's moms, they work long hours to provide for their families. Single moms and queer and people of color who struggle to keep food on the table and make sure that childcare doesn't bankrupt them. When we see moms on television like Carol Brady, we're made to feel like we should be able to do it all. We're made to feel like maybe something is wrong with us. Because whether we like it or not, TV shapes our perception of what is normal, of what is achievable. And when the portrayal of moms just doesn't match reality, it's easy to see how millions of moms in America are bogged down with mom guilt and mental health challenges. We deserve better. Moms First is so proud to partner with the Geena Davis Institute and the Archwell Foundation on this report, and to call on the entertainment industry to more fully represent moms in the media. It's time to rewrite motherhood so that moms can finally see themselves reflected in the characters that shape culture. Don't get me wrong. TV doesn't have to represent real life frame for frame. None of us want to watch every diaper change or every minivan meltdown, but TV should be an escape, but it shouldn't leave us feeling like we're failing our own lives. TV should better reflect our realities. I want to leave the specific calls of action from the report to the GDI team to share, but I want to leave you with this. I want us all to think beyond the archetype of the perfect TV mom. We are watching, all of us, 40 million of America's moms, we are watching. And it's time to show moms front and center as the leading characters that we know we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reshma, for those very, very powerful words, very, very moving. And so now to hear the findings, I would like to welcome Dr. Meredith Conroy, who's our Vice President of Research and Insights at the Institute, and Dr. Michelle Meyer, who's our Senior Director of Research and Methodologies.
Great, thank you so much. Everyone can hear me? And thank you, yes, to Geena, Madeline, and Reshma for your powerful and encouraging remarks. And thank you to all of you for joining us. So today you're going to hear findings from our latest report with Moms First entitled Rewriting Motherhood, How TV Represents Moms and What We Want to See Next. You can access the full report on the Geena Davis website. In this presentation, myself and Dr. Michelle Meyer will be sharing some of the key findings from that study. So as most of you, and many of you are acutely aware, moms in the US are struggling. According to a recent State of Motherhood survey conducted by Motherly, 93% of moms say they are burned out, 89% say they are getting less than 8 hours of sleep a night, and just 36% of moms say they've had an hour to themselves in the last 24. And at work, things are not much better. According to the American Association of University Women, which is a nonprofit working towards gender equality, moms earn just 62 cents to every dollar earned by dads. In short, moms are overburdened at home and undervalued at work.
We talk about this as if it's a relatively new phenomenon resulting from moms entering the workforce in the latter half of the 20th century. But in reality, moms have never done it all. Our perception of the stay-at-home mom who effortlessly manages the children and the home is a myth. In reality, this was only ever achievable by white women who relied on the labor of enslaved or later low-paid domestic workers, who themselves were working mothers. Further, multi-generational homes with grandparents who helped out were a product of necessity during the Great Depression. And until the child labor legislations of the 1930s, many kids didn't require childcare because they themselves were working. Our collective memory is tinted with inaccurate nostalgia that is shaped in many ways by the media we consume. And for most of television's history, the dominant types of families, and by extension moms, that we saw on TV were written in reaction to the realities of the time. The TV shows of the 50s were created to elicit a sense of familiarity and comfort to the new white suburban middle class that was flourishing but also recovering after the war. These audiences were adjusting to new types of neighborhoods and new technologies entering their home. TV families like those on Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, and Ozzie and Harriet were designed to feel like they lived next door. The typical mom of this era was very one-dimensional because the shows were focused primarily on the husband and the kids. In the 60s, writers were reacting to the social and technological upheaval of the decade and seeking creative twists on the popular sitcom formula, which led to an era of fantasy sitcoms like Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, and The Munsters. While the characters remained largely white, they often represented otherness by contrasting the atypical family with their normal suburban neighborhood, and writers used supernatural characters to comment on the feminist and civil rights movements of the time. Additionally, as divorce rates in the US rose, several shows depicted single-parent families, but usually focusing on a widower and his children. The 70s saw a departure from the family sitcom. As the concept of the workplace family started to grow more popular, women were less defined by their role in the home and were often childless. That said, working, often single moms were present in the era on shows like Julia, Alice, and One Day at a Time, but the issues they faced were seen as individual problems rather than social ones. In the 80s, working moms were considered the ideal marketing consumer, and writers sought to appeal to them with the fantasy of supportive husbands or male domestic workers who kept their house running smoothly while they worked. Shows like Mr. Belvedere, The Cosby Show, and Who's the Boss reinforced the idea that moms with careers can find childcare solutions within the home and without the aid of childcare programs. By the 90s and into the 2000s, the availability of different types of networks and platforms engendered more variability in programming. This complicated the idea of a typical TV mom of the era. That said, there still were noteworthy trends, such as the sitcom mom who is more competent or attractive than her husband, as we see on Home Improvement, Family Matters, and Modern Family. Of course, today, there's exponentially more variety in television programming. Does that mean then that there are no longer dominant cultural messages about motherhood on TV? That is what we explore in this report. To investigate our current cultural stories about motherhood, we looked at TV released in 2022. We started with every single show, identified which of them had a mom in the title cast, and drew a random sample from those shows. Nearly half of moms with kids 18 and under were straight, white, and slender. Latinx, LGBTQIA+, disabled, fat, and older moms were all underrepresented. When parents with kids 10 and under were out without their kids, their childcare went unexplained more than 60% of the time. Further, about 1/5 of TV parents were portrayed in an episode where at least one of their children was not seen or discussed at all. It was as if that child did not exist.
We also looked at who was shown carrying out domestic tasks on screen. This is important for signaling responsibility and roles in the home. What we found was 9% of dads, but 20% of moms were shown carrying out domestic tasks on screen. Another way that shows reinforce outdated gender roles is in how the work is shown. We found that when a TV family had a clear breadwinner, nearly 9 times out of 10, it was the dad. Overall, dads are more often shown working than moms and to have a career than moms. Choices like these subtly and not so subtly paint a picture that is out of step with most people's reality, and importantly, it prevents viewers from imagining a world or we actively work to make things different and better? How can we work to change this? Or as Reshma put it, how can we work to greenlight a rewrite of motherhood? You'll hear from our panel soon with their insights and ideas, but here are a few recommendations based on the findings from our study. So number one, the white, straight, thin TV mom has never been a reflection of reality. Instead, let's challenge this by showing moms of color, queer moms, disabled moms, and moms who don't look perfect. Number two, the structural and cultural problems that moms are facing need attention. So we want to see parents grappling with things like the availability of childcare and its costs. Number three, out of step with reality, moms on TV are less likely than dads to be shown working or contributing financially to their families. We want to see on-screen portrayals that diversify family dynamics related to careers, work, and finances. And finally, those most qualified to write realistic stories about motherhood are moms themselves. Hire moms and provide them with resources to retain them. Thanks so much for your attention. And our report is chock full of more findings, so we'll hope you find it and share it. And with that, I'll turn it back to Madeline.
Thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you so much, Michelle. There's so much to unpack. And as they mentioned, the report is live on our website, so please check it out at cjane.org. And without further ado, I'm going to invite all of my panelists to turn on their cameras. And I'd like to introduce Vicki Szabo, Senior Fellow, New America, founder and director of New America's Better Life Lab. Welcome, Vicki. Debbie Wolf, showrunner and EP for Lopez versus Lopez. Dr. Anna Tubbs, New York Times bestselling author of The Three Mothers. Danielle Fishel, actor, producer, director. You all know her from her character Topanga on Boy Meets World and Girl Meets World. And last but not least, Salinas Leiva, actor, author, activist, also starring as Rosie in Lopez versus Lopez. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for giving your time today. Vicki, I'm going to start with you because we were talking about kind of real versus real. And so as an expert in gender equity and family policy, how do you perceive the influence of the make-believe world of television portrayals of motherhood on societal norms and expectations, particularly when it comes to your work, which is really taking it to the ground?
Thank you, Madeline. Yeah, what a great question. And it's an honor to be here. So many thanks to Geena Davis Institute and to Moms First for having me. So my work for the last 15 years has been focused on winning paid family and medical leave policies, paid sick time policies, equal pay, pregnant worker fairness laws, including most recently at the national level. And we still have a long way to go. So these policies that are a patchwork affect tens of millions of people, and yet most Americans are still playing what we like to call the boss lottery, where what you have access to, whether you're able to leave work, whether you have access to childcare at your workplace or subsidies for childcare, whether you're able to take a sick day, completely depends on what your boss provides to you. And so we're really working to change that. And so our journey here at the Better Life Lab, where I am the director of the Entertainment Initiative, which is part of a broader policy and narrative program and work, really came to be after this moment in 2021, where folks might remember we're coming through a pandemic. There was this moment where there was a big national conversation about whether we should have a national paid family and medical leave program, robust investments in childcare, and that opportunity evaporated. And part of the reason that it evaporated, there are lots of them, but one of the reasons are these cultural norms that we hold, where we believe very much that people pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that your individual success or failure depends on what you do and not on whether there are systems and policies in place to support you or cultural norms that support the fact that most people are working and providing care to a child or to a loved one. And so we know that part of why policy change is slow is because of these narratives. So we developed this entertainment initiative focused on the idea that when people see different stories, stories where workers are talking about their childcare responsibilities or their need for leave, where workers are shown grappling with whether they can afford to take a sick day, and pointing towards solutions. The fact that these policies do exist in some US states and some cities, it starts to build momentum for change. And I really just want to, underscore the fact that just 27% of workers in the US today have paid family leave through their jobs. Half of Americans live in what we call childcare deserts, where there are 3 children for every spot at least, and where most people live in places where childcare costs more than college or public university. There's 53 million people that are providing care to loved ones, and 11 million of those are caring both for a child and for an older adult, but without leave or workplace accommodations. And although women comprise half the workforce, and most women in 2-earner families are bringing home a substantial share of their family's earnings, as we think of these, and we know from this study that people perceive women's earnings as optional. We also know that their labor is undervalued. Women overall, part-time, full-time, all races, earn 77 cents for every dollar paid to men. For women of color, for disabled women, for queer women, it's worse. And for moms in those subgroups, it's even worse. And so what we hope to see through our initiative, Rescripting Gender, Work, Family, and Care, are different depictions than what's out there now. People knowing that they're not alone, seeing their circumstances reflected on screen, seeing the ability to find supports, or reflect back, like, what is missing? Why is the status quo the way that it is? And we really just believe that that will make a difference in aggregating people's understanding into policy changes and demand for those policy changes.
Thank you so much, Vicki. So, Debbie, I want to turn over to you, because we're talking about how the make-believe world plays out in the real world. And you were very intentional in creating Lopez versus Lopez. But I do want to point something out. You were only the second Latina in history to have a sitcom on network TV. And I just wanted to take a beat back. And you said, I turned to writing as an outlet to deal with my identity crisis. I was always feeling like an underdog. So I would like you to just talk a little bit about that in terms of how you think about storytelling. And then I actually have a mini part 2 for you about telling how Lopez versus Lopez came about.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a family. My mother's Salvadorian, an immigrant from El Salvador. My dad is Jewish. So I grew up with 2 very different perspectives, and I definitely had an identity crisis growing up. Like, I wasn't Latina enough, I wasn't Jewish enough. So yeah, that storytelling became my way of just trying to unpack my trauma, I suppose, and figure out who I was. And I don't take lightly that I'm only the second Latina in history with a network sitcom. I think it's pretty silly that it's 2024. There definitely should be more of us at this point. But I definitely hope that with this show and the work that we're doing on this show, that we can further, representation. Like, in my room, I'm training, writers of tomorrow that I hope will go out and pitch their own projects with more representation in it. And there's just so much, there's so little out there offered to us. And that's how I felt growing up as well. Growing up in Miami, like, I think we had one show that was called Que Pasa USA, that was like a Cuban family, and it was in Spanglish, and I felt seen. I felt like my family was there. And it wasn't until Real Women Have Curves was the next time I saw, my family. And that was like very far between. And then, I was fortunate enough to work on One Day at a Time with Gloria Calderon-Kellett, when it was the first time I got to see a Latina showrunner in action, and seeing her do her thing made me feel like I could also pursue this career as a career. So, I think representation is so important, and putting out there that I am a Latina showrunner is so important, because I really want other young Latinas to know that this is a viable career for them, and they can get here.
Well, I want to follow up on that. You said, I always write from my experiences, from my personal life. And that's what I saw Mayan was doing. And I just felt immediately drawn to it. And of course, everyone's scrolling TikTok at 3 a.m. because we all have insomnia. Can you talk a little bit about how this actual story came to be?
Yeah, so Mayan Lopez has a TikTok, and it was during the pandemic. Like, she was using, TikTok as an outlet, creative outlet, and I was just watching it because I had nothing else going on. And like, we were stuck at home. And I came across her TikTok, and what struck me about it is she was sort of like detailing, the details of her parents' divorce, and she was twerking upside down. And I was just thought it was so hilarious and so raw. And I'm a big fan of George Lopez, her father, and I felt like she was doing the same thing that he does. She was taking her life and she was making it funny. She knew it was funny about her pain and her suffering. And I was like, if this video exists, she's calling out her dad. Like, there was a whole, like, about her mom getting a huge settlement. And I'm like, he hasn't sued her. I was like, there has to be more to mine here. And when I met with both of them, there definitely was a lot more to mine, about their relationship and how they hadn't spoken for many years. And George and mine just started speaking again during the pandemic. They were pretty estranged for about 10 years, and we're coming back together. And I caught them right in that moment. And so the healing, has started with this show, and it continues to this day.
Thank you so much for that. And so while we're on Lopez versus Lopez, I want to turn over to you, Salinas, and we're talking about defying cultural norms, which you have done your entire career. You're also a Cuban actor and also of Dominican descent. Can you talk a little bit about your role as Rosie, knowing that it is inspired by real world people?
Well, it's a combination of a lot of different mothers, a lot of different women. Myself, Debbie's mother, like a sprinkle of mine's mother. I mean, it's literally a celebration of all the women that we have in our lives. I love playing Rosie. I think that she is all the things that I miss watching on television, especially in the world of sitcom. First of all, I'm an Afro Latina. We haven't really seen that in the world of sitcom in network TV. So I'm an Afro Latina well over the age of 40, with a business, celebrating life, a boss, and navigating not only her life, but the life of her daughter and her grandson. So what I love about the writing on this show is that it really is a true representation of the world that I grew up in, where the family helped out in taking care of the child. And in this show, I was listening earlier to the conversation, and on this show, we do explain how, who takes care of Chance. On the show, it's either he's with mom or dad, grandpa, or with Nana. And that is really a 100% on point when it comes to the Latino culture, at least the way I grew up in the time that I grew up in. My mother didn't trust anyone outside the family to watch over me. So again, playing Rosie to me is a celebration of finally a celebration of womanhood on television like it's never done, been done before. I'm not a thin, a pixie. I'm out here living my best life, showing my curves, celebrating my curves. Our wonderful wardrobe designers and we talk all the time, and we're like, I want to emphasize this body, honey. You know what I mean? We want to celebrate everything because I know that there are women out there that are looking at me and feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm finally being seen. And for me, as an Afro Latina growing up, I never saw myself on the screen. So I know that what we're doing on this show is not just entertaining, but we are also giving light to so many people that have not ever really seen themselves in this powerful way and in a very smart way.
Thank you so much. So I want to build on what you were saying about giving light to people who may not have been seen. And Anna, I'm going to go over to you because you're the full name of your book, The Three Mothers, How the Mothers of Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and James Baldwin Shaped a Nation. People don't think about the powerful women that helped shape, these leaders who aren't unseen. So can you give us some context of what made you think about writing that story, what you learned about it? Were there patterns in terms of these mothers, and then what manifested in terms of these very powerful men?
Yes, definitely. I often say that people congratulate me for this creative idea I had to highlight the mothers in this book. And I realized I don't think this is creative at all. I find it very sad that it took up until 2021 for someone to care about these mothers and these women. And every single year we celebrate MLK Jr. Day, as we should. We rightfully should celebrate him. It's around January 15th, around his birthday. But why have we never before thought about the other person who was in the room on the day that he was born? Perhaps the woman who birthed him, and also knowing who she was, her influence, her power. A large part of my work is celebrating that aspect of motherhood, and really realizing that these women, all three of them, did what their sons became famous for long before their sons even existed. That motherhood was an extension of their identity. It wasn't that suddenly who they were before no longer mattered, but instead they grew their passions, they applied their activism in their motherhood. So I just want to give a little bit of a background on each of these mothers and show how that changes our understanding, not only of them, but of our national movements when we do know their stories, and then have us question why there is this strategy to erase these stories. It's very purposeful for mothers to think that we are not powerful. It's very purposeful for us to feel like we are the ones to blame, that we are supposed to be carrying this all on our own. All of that is very strategic, especially in the case of women of color. So with Alberta King, this is MLK Jr.'s mother. She was a freedom fighter. She was raised by two parents who believed that religion was always intertwined with social justice. So she participated in boycotts and in marches, even when she was a young girl. They had access to education. She believed that this allowed her to be a better freedom fighter, that it didn't make her better than other people, but instead gave her more responsibility to do something for her larger community. So basically everything that we celebrate MLK Jr. for, his mother was doing, again, long before he was even a thought in her mind. When we look at Malcolm X's mother, Louise Little, she was a radical activist who believed in Black nationalism, in Black pride, standing for our rights by any means necessary. She was influenced by her grandparents who were at one point enslaved and able to gain their freedom. And so she believes that you must die fighting for your freedom, fighting for your life, that is better than living bowing down to somebody who's trying to oppress you. So when we know this about her, and we know that she actually met her husband because they were both organizers for this international Marcus Garvey movement, we now better understand why Malcolm X becomes who he is. He wasn't just kind of thinking of this all on his own. Instead, he was really following in his mother's and his father's footsteps. And then when we look at James Baldwin, his mother, Bertis Baldwin, was a writer herself. She believed in the power of words, in the power of language, how she could help other people through the darkest times in their lives by showing them that we can focus on love. We can focus on getting through the pain if we can really confront the reality of that pain. And she expanded that to think about Jim Crow, to think about how on a national level, we can move past our dark times and past our pain. And we can tell people how to do that through our writing. So she gifted everybody letters filled with these lessons. So later, when her son becomes the famous writer, James Baldwin, who says that he is a witness to the power of light, and he uses his writing to do that, he again is not just pulling this out of thin air, he is actually directly quoting his mother. And so when I started that research, I wasn't necessarily trying to prove that there were these very direct, obvious connections between the mothers and their sons, because in reality, all of us are influenced by our parents. But in these three examples, it is undeniable that they are walking in their mother's footsteps, and therefore that much more painful that we did not know these stories when we celebrate these men over and over and over again. What shifts in our minds when we know it was their mothers who taught them how to fight for our nation, to fight for our world? And why were we being denied that knowledge to begin with?
Thank you so much. That is just riveting. Can't wait to read your book. I hope everyone who is watching today and listening will also read. Danielle, I'm going to go over to you, because when we talk about connecting mother to son, you have two sons, and now you're a real mom. But most of us grew up knowing you as the fabulous Topanga. So can you talk a little bit about, you've been working in this industry a really long time, becoming a mom, how did that change for you? And then also then playing a mom, later on?
Yeah, I was so lucky that when I started acting at only 10 years old, my first major role at the age of 12 was playing Topanga Lawrence, who I'm told all the time how Topanga was maybe the first kid feminist young girls had ever seen. And she had a lot of very progressive thoughts and a lot of progressive ideas. And I am honored and was lucky to be able to bring her to life. And then when we moved from Boy Meets World, 15 years later, we started Girl Meets World. I wasn't a mom yet at the time. And I was worried that I wasn't going to know what would Topanga be like as a mother? Who would she be? And thankfully, they maintained that boss feminist energy that Topanga had as a kid. And now she was the primary breadwinner for her family. Of course, it's TV. We lived in an apartment in New York that we would have needed to be making millions of dollars to afford. But, Corey was a school teacher. He was definitely not the breadwinner in the family. Topanga, as a lawyer, was. And yet, with that, while I'm proud of that, the person who was most often home when the kids came home from school was Topanga. The person who had made the dinner most often was Topanga. The person you saw carrying a laundry basket was most often Topanga. I don't know if I remember a time when Corey was seen folding the laundry at home when the kids walked in the door. And because I wasn't a mom myself at the time, I don't know that I thought to speak up and say, hold on a second. In my family, this isn't necessarily how it's going down. In my real life, I have a very fair partnership. My husband and I have to trade off. And sometimes those things just don't get done. If one of us can't do it, it doesn't get done. And now that I'm a full-time director, being able to work with people like Debbie and like Selenice on Lopez versus Lopez, it is such a joy to work with strong women. And like when Selenice will say something to me while we're working and she'll say, you know what, this isn't striking as real to me. I'd like to make a suggestion. And we go to Debbie. Debbie is always ready to hear it and always ready to say, absolutely, let's do the authentic thing. Let's make this real. And so having more women in positions of showrunner and feeling, like Selenice having a voice to say, I refuse to let something be inauthentic is so important because life is really very much imitating art.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to build on some of the things you were saying about what we're seeing in terms of even in the fictional world about the care and the caretaking and the domesticity falling on, for the most part, the mom. And Vicky, you have, a lot of examples of how the fictional world of TV led to some amazing policy changes and also normalizing certain things. So can you give us some kind of examples of how what can happen in the fictional world can really help drive policies and also normalize situations?
Yeah, absolutely. So like the most famous examples that everybody always talks about are seatbelts, normalizing seatbelts, and the term designated driver. Those were Norman Lear era sort of revelations that continue to be talked about today in the circles where people are having these conversations. I think in our lifetime, the transformational work around LGBTQ equality stems from images and work on television that groups like GLAAD and the Human Rights Campaign have done, and many others over the years, building narrative and culture change into television shows, into representation behind the scenes, which I agree is completely relevant in this work family gender context too. Pairing those narrative and cultural conversations with work on the ground for legislation and litigation, and then finding ways to aggregate the cultural zeitgeist into advocacy for policy change that ultimately led in 2022 to the Respect for Marriage Act, which passed Congress and legalized same-sex marriage. And I believe I just learned that at South by Southwest, there's actually a new study that will be out soon, showing that the show Reservation Dogs has increased support for the Indian Child Welfare Act. So this is possible, and I'm so excited to think about how these changes, whether they're whole storylines or pieces of stories, or even just nudges in dialogue, or who's carrying the laundry basket, or where the kid is, or whether, you know, somebody on TV acknowledges that they need to go to work and they can't take leave, or they are taking leave, and how lucky they are to have paid leave when other people don't, how that can start to really build demand and accountability for policymakers in making the changes that we need.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And I want to go back over to you, Debbie. So with great power comes great responsibility. And, you know, you're having a fictional show, but it is grounded in kind of real lived experiences. So what has it been like for you to think about the storylines and juggle between the real life of the Lopez's versus, you know, the fictional life? And then also, what were some of the things that you thought about in crafting Rosie?
Yeah. I think that, you know, what we start with when we're approaching storylines for the show is like we always start from, you know, real life. We always start from real stories. So we start with Maya and George, who have so many stories, and we pull from their real issues and history, because they're very open with us, both of them, about all their struggles, and like I said, they understand what's funny about their struggles as well. And then, you know, within our room too, you know, we have you know, all types in our rooms. We have women, we have men, we have LGBTQIA plus, we have Black, we have Latinos, and that was all very intentional to staff a room of people with all different perspectives, who helped me craft these authentic storylines. And oftentimes, you know, we'll all have a shared experience, and that's when we know we have something great, because like we've all been through it, but we all have different perspectives on how it went down, and that's how a lot of the stories are born. And you know, I think so everything does come from life. And if it hasn't happened in real life, I don't really want it in the show. You know, I mean, obviously it's TV, we exaggerate some things, like we exaggerate real life situations and we go a little fantastical sometimes, but it's all grounded in something that really happened to somebody, you know, whether it was George and Mayan or whether it was even Seleni's. And Seleni's is, you know, a gift to the world. She, as you know, she took Rosie to another level that I couldn't even imagine. You know, I pictured her as one person, or sort of had a general idea, but then Selenis came in and just really like developed this character, like gave her so much depth, and created this like very intelligent, strong, funny, you know, woman, mother. And you know, she came into the room very early on and talked about how she saw Rosie, and that was like so essential to how we ended up developing the character. And I think we've really created someone that, you know, we all know her, like we all have a Rosie in our lives. And I credit that to Selenis' brilliant performance and giving us so much. And then, you know, the writers also just really sharing their stories about, you know, them being mothers, or, you know, or their own mothers. You know, a lot of my own mother, my Salvadorian mother, who's a very strong woman who speaks her mind, whether I like it or not, is in Rosie. And so, yeah, that's how she came about.
And then I want to, of course, go back over to Selenis. You know, you've played this phenomenal mom here, and then you've also played a wonderful mom in Creed 3 and some of your other roles. Can you talk a little bit about the impact? You know, how have audiences responded to you in these roles?
You know, I love when women come up to me, especially young women, and they're always like, oh man, you remind me of my mother, you remind me of my titi, my aunt, who's so strong, and I love her. I love that women are also very grateful for my strength on the screen. And I think at this point, it's not that I go in saying, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be strong in everything I do. I think it's just you bring a little bit of who you are into each character. And I stand strong in my femininity. I stand strong in my culture. unapologetically. I think at this point, I think the older you get, the more you're like, this is me, this is what it's all about, like it, or not, here I am. And so there is, I love to pull from that, and I want to be real and authentic on the screen. So when I have someone like Rosie or even Gloria Mendoza on Orange is the New Black, my character on Gabby on Diary of a Future President, these were all really strong women. What they all have in common, aside from being Latina, is that they were strong women who spoke their minds, and who did it with love. And I guess what made me do this, or makes me kind of deliver these performances, is because I always wanted to see that. I always wanted to see that on the screen. And so I'm like, hey, I have an opportunity to do that. So this is my give back.
And we're so lucky and so fortunate. Anna, I want to build off of what Celanese was talking about in terms of what we want to see, and sharing lived experience. As a writer, from your perspective, what would you like to see? Do you have any examples of something you did see where you're like, we're moving in the right direction?
I think I want to see more around this identity of the mother and not erasing her identity. So on several different levels, I want to make sure we know what that mother is passionate about, what she loves to do, what brings her joy, versus us constantly seeing mothers represented as bringing joy to everybody else. And how so often mothers, I'm a mother myself of 3 young babies. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-month-old at home. And I was really determined, after doing the research for my book and understanding how the United States is so horrible towards mothers, to make sure that I approached my motherhood with a lot of confidence and knowing what I deserved in my role as a mother, and knowing that I didn't have to deny myself in order to love my children, even though the narrative was going to tell me that over and over and over again. And we were going to thank mothers for putting themselves behind everybody else. And how often do we say to moms, thank you for really, coming from here for my needs, being here for my needs, while, putting yourself behind the rest of us. And I want that to be completely eradicated in the stories that we tell. I want mothers to feel like the better they are doing, the better everybody else will do. So any characters that we can see where we really see the reality of that passion, what they love, whether that's them working at home and unpaid, because really stay-at-home moms are working so incredibly hard, or they're working at home and are paid by a company, or they're working outside of the home. I want to understand what they care about, what they're driven by. And I also want to see them celebrating themselves.
Thank you so much for that. So, Danielle, you had said in an article, the house is a mess. I have a sty in my left eye. I haven't showered in 2 days. And you've played a mom in the make-believe world. You're directing now. What would you like to see, and what are you trying to inform in the projects that you are directing now, bringing all of this experience full circle?
Yeah, I mean, the realities, I remember I've never been more shocked by anything than I was about the transition into motherhood. My whole life thought, I want to be a mother. I'm going to be great at being a mother because I love kids. And that's kind of all I knew. I make a joke regularly that I was a really perfect parent before I had children. And then I had children and I realized I don't know what I'm doing. And I went back to work after only 8 weeks. And thankfully, I was in a very privileged position where I was able to have a full-time nanny. And in every opportunity I had where I got to speak about, I was asked all the time, how do you do it? And the first thing I would say is, I am not the one doing it. I could not do it without a team of help. And I will never miss an opportunity to speak on that. And like I mentioned, being able to work with people like Debbie Wolf and Celanese, who are so forward thinking and are so progressive and are so committed to authenticity, that makes my job as a director, bringing real life situations to the screen, a whole lot easier. And then behind the scenes, I also have a production company where one of our main goals is to try and bring people with disabilities to screen. As you saw in the research, 0% of moms on TV from that research year in 2022 had a disability. And yet that isn't the experience for the majority of people. And so that's something that's really important to me. And I've noticed that there tends to be some pushback. We've gone in to pitch some shows where the lead characters, maybe mom and dad, or just mom, have a disability. And we've been asked, is it going to be easy to find an actor who has a disability? And it's pretty shocking. And so we always have our answers, and the research and this kind of stuff that you guys are doing is helping us as we go into those rooms, and will hopefully help bring disabilities onto your screen so it can reflect what we see in the world.
Moms come in all shapes and sizes, right? So I think we have time for one question. So I'm going to invite Jasmine Barad, who's our Senior Director of Events, to ask that question.
Thanks, Madeline. And thank you all for this panel. I mean, as a mom, this one like hit home for me. So thank you so much. It's so poignant right now. But yes, I know we're running low on time, but we've had some great questions come in. I think one that could be asked almost anybody. But in developing stories, how do you balance representing the issues mothers face, whether it's childcare, balancing work, kids, etc., with empowering mom characters, ensuring mother characters don't become defined by their status as a mom or have their power contributions defined by what they do for their partner and kids? I think I kind of touched on that, but maybe we can build more on that one.
I was just thinking, like, I think that, like, we do show an equal partnership on our show between Quentin and Mayan. You know, Quentin definitely helps out with the chores and, and the cooking and everything. And I think that that's important to show, you know, so I think, you know, there's still sort of the idea that, you know, the woman has to do it all. And, you know, that's what we're trying to put out there, is that no, like, they can be equal. And, you know, both our characters work. And, you know, this season, they're both balancing, you know, working full time and trying to take care of their son and the household. And they fight about it. Actually, we have an episode where they actually fight about it and come up with a plan. So I think that we're showing that. And I hope, you know, young men take note from Quentin to help out their wives more around the house. So I hope that that helps change things in the world.
I could just jump in and share, we here at New America just did a study with MarketCast on what audiences want to see, and found that 84% of engaged streaming viewers want to see more stories that are realistic depictions of gender, work, family, and care. And 60% want to see more equitable depictions of women who are working while also being loving parents, and dads who are providing men who are providing hands-on care to children and to loved ones. Characters who are speaking with pride rather than apology about caregiving and parenting, supportive bosses and colleagues and workplaces that support working parents and caregivers, and depictions of people using and finding resources like paid leave and childcare. And that audiences, more than half of audiences, have these experiences themselves and expect to have these experiences in the next 5 years. And Gen Z, millennials, parents, Latino audiences, and audiences that are more downscale are the most interested in seeing these depictions that are reflecting their lives and showing a more aspirational future, which I thought was really fascinating, because we hear so much about escapism, but we can do this in any genre, in any type of story, and there are great examples out there of shows that have done it well, including the ones that we were talking about here today.
The only thing I want to add is that I think if we can represent more of that introspection of women and how they see themselves, right? If we can have moments where women are talking about their own experiences, whether these are, you know, scripted characters, unscripted, and also them talking to friends. This is often a space where we do feel those affirmations, where we really do recognize in each other the burden that we are holding and all of the weight that women and mothers are holding. And so those scenes, I'm just starting to get into screenwriting. I'm dipping my toe in it, but those scenes where we can get women describing themselves can be so incredibly powerful, because so much of our representation has to do with somebody else's lens, how they see mothers. Even again, with the book, when I was researching these women, so many of the resources that were available to me were from the perspective of men. And they often say things like, wow, women are so strong and women are so powerful, rather than really thinking about the intentionality and all of the effort that it requires women to do this powerful strength work day in and day out. It's not something that just happens naturally. It's something that requires deep thought and deep care, especially when we're thinking about motherhood.
You guys are all inspiring me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I think I'm excited because I see what we're doing here on Lopez versus Lopez. It's happening. We are tackling a lot of these really important issues in such a creative way, in a fun way, in a real way. It's a comedy, but we are really making sure that we are staying grounded when it comes to the relationships between this family. And, Rosie and Mayan play a really big role in showing the strength of a family unit. And, Quentin does help out around the house, and it's the norm. And that's what should, we kind of, people, I have faith that this new generation, in watching this new way of being creative, will be inspired to change a lot of this old way of thinking. So this has inspired me tremendously with future projects that I want to write as well. Just hearing from you all share means so much. And I think that it's really exciting times when we have these conversations. So thank you.
Yeah. And I just want to say really quick to all our watchers that we're premiering April 2nd on NBC, 8 p.m. and 8:30. So everyone, please tune in. Ratings matter to keep us on the air. So please tune in. Thank you.
Well, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. One of the questions that came in is, will there be a recording made? Yes, there will, that we will share. Your homework assignment, aside from watching Lopez versus Lopez, also watch anything that Danielle is directing, read anything that Dr. Tubbs is writing, yes. Read anything that Vicky Sabo is coming out with and research-wise. I want to thank our illustrious ASL interpreters, Sharon Pierre-Louis and Rachel Groner. And also the report is live. So please read it. Please look at social at GeenaDavis.org. We'll be sharing it out. And I hope you will join us again. And I hope everyone has a blessed day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.